He pressed the button and the door shut, but it didn't shut in time, and the guy was able to get his knife out and take a swipe at us, so we backed off the door, and I ran around the back side of the bus driver took off, and then we both returned to the front to see what had happened, and he hadn't gotten off the bus. The door was still open. We shut the bus door that time and shut it. It was at that point that he came, he started walking to the front of the bus, and he had the head in his hand, and he just looked at us like this and dropped it on the ground, like totally calm. The three of us had weapons from the trucker's truck there, and we just stayed outside while he tried to get out the door, telling him, "No, stay put, stay there, don't try to come out." He tried to get the bus working, and the bus driver disabled the bus somehow in the back.
You ever see a picture that just gives you like full body chills? This photo was captured in 2007, and it seems like kind of a harmless picture, right? There's nothing that's very out of the ordinary. It's taken outside of an apartment window by a woman named Maria Leontinka in Czech Republic. The man was just outside of the apartment. He was screaming, he was shouting, and this woman took the picture because she was going to report it to the property manager, having no idea that something very dark just occurred in that building. Inside that apartment building in 209 was a family of 4, all of which had been decapitated, and it's believed that man who was captured was responsible. Police are then able to connect the dots of another picture that was taken across town on the same exact day. It's believed to have been the same man, that he approached this group of teenagers and he was bragging about what he had just done, and they weren't sure if he was for real, if he was kidding, psychotic, so they took a picture of his face before he eventually ran. And this was the best shot they got. They even sketched the man, but they never found him, and his motive remained unknown.
These facial reconstructions helped identify victims, and they're downright creepy. In 2015, a body was discovered along the I-40 highway near Hinton, Oklahoma. The body was so badly decomposed that a forensic artist created this reconstruction hoping somebody would recognize her. She was identified over a year later, and her killer pleaded guilty in 2017 and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. In 1994, a hiker stumbled across a skull near Windy Point, Colorado. These reconstructions were made, but the case remained cold for nearly 30 years. She became known as Windy Point Jane Doe. It wasn't until March of this year that she was identified as Susan Hobbs of Washington State. This reconstruction was done on a body that was found in Salem, New Hampshire in August of 1968. The unidentified body had 4 gunshot wounds. It wasn't until 2019 when John Doe was identified as Vermont resident Winston Morris.
He returned home one night and found Gacy drunk and dressed in his clown costume. Gacy invited Cram to join him for a drink. The men had a few Mai Tais. Then Gacy tricked Cram into the handcuffs.
And he's laughing, ha ha ha, you know, just like a little kid. You know, and again, I'm standing there looking at a clown in a clown suit, laughing at me because I'm locked up. And he's like, poke me. Does it bother you? Huh? Does that bother you? Huh? So I told him, I said, if you don't take these off, I'm gonna kick your ass.
The teenager then saw a side of his boss that few ever lived to tell about.
It was just like a light switch went off in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a thought. He just starts growling like a mad dog.
Gacy lunged at Cram and swung him around the room, shouting, "I'm going." Despite the handcuffs, Cram was able to push Gacy to the ground. He somehow managed to grab the key and escape to his room. David Cram moved out. Others were not so lucky.
Serial killer facts that'll haunt your nightmares. Part 5. When Peter Curtin was just 10 years old, he had his first sexual experience with a goat, and the years that followed, he would regularly do it with other farm animals. At age 13, he killed his first person and would murder over 60 more. In the 1910s, Bela Kiss killed 69 people and tried to pickle them. And when police found their bodies in barrels, they had puncture marks on their neck and they had been drained of all their blood. Pedro Rodriguez Filho killed 71 people both in and out of prison. He was released a few years ago and now has a YouTube channel where he makes fishing videos. Cannibal killer Albert Fish enjoyed shoving sewing needles in his pelvic area while he touched himself. And before his execution in 1936, a medical examiner found over 30 needles in his pelvis. Andrei Chikatilo, better known as the Rostov Ripper, was originally captured but had been released due to a 1 in a million genetic condition that caused the blood type in a sample to be different from the blood type in his semen.
I was a soldier who cooked my girlfriend in our apartment above a voodoo shop, ate her, and then jumped to my death. The detectives would find her charred head in a pot. Her legs and feet were in pans. The rest of her body was in rubbish bags in the fridge apartment we had in New Orleans, Louisiana. In my 20s, I had served in Afghanistan and Iraq. You could say I was proud and bitter about the experience. Then in the middle of Hurricane Katrina, Adi had given me shelter. That's where we fell in love. Over time, my past would catch up to me and have caused me great depression. Addie had accused me of cheating on her, and I snapped. I strangled her out of rage and watched her life leave her eyes. I scared myself not by the action of calmly strangling the woman I'd loved for 1.5 years. I then dismembered her body and seasoned her pretty well. After I hid my deed, I walked over to the Omni Hotel and had one last drink before jumping off of a roof. The cops would find my suicide note in my pocket that led them to my girlfriend. The stove I used to cook and eat her is now on display at the Bloody Mary New Orleans Haunted Museum.
Get ready to face the true face of evil. I am Michel Fourniret, also known as the Ogre of the Ardennes, whose merciless acts will haunt you forever. Will you dare to look? I was born on April 4th, 1942, in Sedan. I grew up in a modest family, facing a difficult childhood. I was always seen as a shy and reserved child, while my peers labeled me as cunning and a thief. Despite this, I managed to obtain a university degree and worked as a carpenter for several years. However, my life took a dark turn when obsessive thoughts gradually consumed me. I became obsessed with sordid stories and began fantasizing about committing terrible acts. Something was wrong with me. Everything changed when I met my partner, Monique Olivier. She aided me in taking the lives of 11 individuals, including several young girls. Monique played an active role in abductions and the commission of these heinous acts. We formed a malevolent couple for years. In 2003, I was finally arrested, but I almost walked free due to a lack of evidence. It was Monique who confessed everything. In 2008, I was tried for my crimes in France and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. My death in May 2021 put an end to any further legal proceedings against me. My crimes have left an indelible mark on the criminal history of France and Belgium, deeply affecting the families of the victims and society as a whole.
This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Thelma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Thelma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Thelma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Thelma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Thelma's husband, Kevin, wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Haley is currently awaiting trial.
This is the father-daughter incest case that turned into a murder. You guys, this one is disgusting, and if I had to hear it, then so do you. Hi, I'm Julie. I talk about true crime, dark history, and all things weird and spooky, so if that's what you're into, please give me a follow and also follow my Instagram. Okay, so you're gonna need a backstory. In 1995, when Stephen Plattle was 20 years old, he met and groomed 15-year-old Alyssa on the internet. He traveled to San Antonio, Texas to begin a sexual relationship with her. And then Alyssa ran away with Stephen to begin a life with him in New York. Alyssa is his first wife, by the way. Alyssa became pregnant at 16, and then they had their first baby when she turned 17 years old, and they named her Denise Plattle. According to Alyssa, Stephen inflicted torturous abuse on their daughter Denise. He pinched her and beat her till she was black and blue, and even tried to drown her multiple times. Alyssa decided to put Denise up for adoption because she didn't believe that Denise would have a chance at life if she lived with Stephen. Anthony and Kelly Fusco adopted Denise and renamed her Katie Rose Fusco. In August 2016, when Katie was 18 years old, she reached out to her biological parents Stephen and Alyssa Plattle on Facebook. They met in Knightdale, North Carolina, and Katie then decided to move in with Stephen and Alyssa and their 2 children. By the time Katie moved in, Stephen and Alyssa had actually agreed to separate, so they were sleeping in different bedrooms. Over the following months, Stephen and Katie became incredibly close. In May 2017, Alyssa read in one of her children's diaries that Katie and Stephen were involved in sexual activity and that Katie was pregnant. She read that her 2 children were told that Katie was their stepmother. Alyssa called Stephen immediately, and then he confirmed that this abusive, incestuous relationship was true and that she was actually pregnant. Alyssa then called the police, as she should. On July 20, 2017, Stephen and Katie got married and lied on their marriage documents saying that they weren't related. The wedding was attended by Stephen's mother and Katie's adoptive parents. It just baffles me that they attended this disgusting wedding. There is no way that these people didn't know that they were related. Katie gave birth to her own father's baby and named him Bennett Kieran Plattle in September 2017. In January 2018, Katie and Stephen were arrested for incest charges. The judge ordered that Katie and Stephen have no contact with each other and that Bennett would go into the custody of Stephen's mother. Following their release bond, Katie decided to move back in with her adoptive parents, and she told Stephen that she did not want to continue with this relationship. Sorry guys, come back for part 2 because I don't have the 10-minute feature.
This is Albert Fish, the worst pedophile in American history. Oh yeah, he was also a cannibal and a serial killer. So we talked in part 1 of this series about how Albert Fish had these weird sexual desires. He was eating feces, drinking urine, all of that sort of stuff. But this dude also was sadomasochistic and he liked to harm himself. This is a real x-ray of his pelvic area. After his arrest eventually, they discovered 29 plus needles shoved into his groin and all throughout his lower half. This is a picture of Albert Fish's nail paddle that he would literally hit himself in the buttocks with. I'm telling you, this dude really liked pain and this is just horrific. And he was also known to douse wool in lighter fluid, stick it into his anus, and light it on fire. I'm not kidding you when I tell you that this dude was messed up. So around the year 1919, Albert Fish stabbed an intellectually disabled boy. I don't know if he killed him or not, it just says that he stabbed him. And I'm going to state it here, Albert Fish chose people with minorities, he chose mentally disabled people and poor people as his victims because, as he said later in life, no one would miss them. Albert Fish later claimed that he'd tortured and murdered lots of young kids and that he used his implements of hell to torture and murder them. These tools included a butcher knife, a meat cleaver, and a handsaw. So July 11th, 1924, Albert Fish finds an 8-year-old girl named Beatrice Keel playing on her parents' farm just out in the prairie. He offered the young girl money to come help him find rhubarb, and she was going to go with him, but Beatrice's mother came at the right moment and chased Albert Fish away. A couple days later, Beatrice's father discovered Albert Fish sleeping in their family's barn on the property. He chased him out. And that family lucked out because just 3 days later, Albert Fish would claim his first official victim whom he tortured and murdered, Francis McDonald. And the story of young Francis's death is absolutely horrific. Apparently that day he had been playing catch with his friends out in the park, but his parents called the police later on in the day when he never returned home. But what happened? Well, later in the day they found Francis's body hanging in a tree near his home. The young child had been sexually assaulted, strangled to death with his own suspenders, and then stabbed a number of times. In fact, his entire left hamstring had been almost entirely stripped from his flesh. Francis's friends said that they saw Francis leaving the area with a man dressed in gray. But obviously at the time, no one knew who Albert Fish was, so the papers called this mysterious figure the Gray Man. And it it was at this point in the story when Albert Fish would commit what some would claim to be his most horrific crime to date, the murder and cannibalism of young Grace Budd. But I'm running out of time here, so if you want to hear the full story about what happened next and his arrest and everything, follow me. I'm going to post a part 3 soon because I want to tell Grace's story in its entirety.
These are the legs of a 13-year-old child. Swollen, yellow, and twisted, these injuries are not the result of a car crash, a sports injury, or some disease. No, these bruised, broken legs are the result of a deranged madman. He's addicted to the sound of breaking bones and loves inflicting pain on his victims. This is the story of Thaddeus Phillips, the boy who survived the Bone Breaker. Baraboo, Wisconsin, 1995. It's the night of July 29th and Thad Phillips is sound asleep. Suddenly, he feels the sensation of being lifted up, but this isn't a dream. It's the beginning of a real-life nightmare. At some point, he realizes that he's being carried through the house, and Thad, who's still half asleep and groggy out of his mind, assumes it's his dad. As he becomes more aware, Thad realizes that he is in the arms of someone he does not know.